Hello, St. Mark's, and welcome back to another Musical Monday. My name is James Hollier, and I'm the Director of Music here at St. Mark's Episcopal Church. And it's my pleasure to welcome you back for another episode of our virtual concert series called Musical Mondays. And I'm actually here at our sanctuary organ here at St. Mark's, which Bill Bowling wisely pointed out has not actually been featured in our series yet. I've played several things on our lovely chapel organ, but have yet to feature the sanctuary organ, partially because it gets featured every Sunday in our virtual services. So not an intentional omission, but because of that today, I'm featuring our lovely Wicks pipe organ. I'm going to play a Mendelsohn organ sonata for you that sort of showcases some different parts of the organ. But before that, thanks to Barbara Stevenson and her great idea, I'm going to give you a brief tour of the organ and how it works. She watched last week Tim Tuller's fine concert down at the cathedral, and their camera work really showed off the organ down there at the cathedral. And she said, gosh, I'd never realized how complicated it was. And I knew it was pretty complicated, but it's even more complicated than I thought with all the different buttons and stops and things that organists have to manipulate as they also play the music. And she said she'd like to know more about it. So that's where the idea came. I'm going to do a little tour first, and then I'll play the Mendelsohn Sonata to sort of show some things that I talk about on the tour. So first of all, I'm sitting at what's called the console. The place that you play at the organ, is generally called the console, but it consists of the keyboards, the pedals, which are basically a keyboard for your feet, music desk, where you have your music to look at, and then either rocker tabs or stop jams. We have both, which is where all the different stops are that you can pull to bring on different sounds. Our organ was built for our church by the Wicks Pipe Organ Company in Highland, Illinois. It is 44 ranks, which means that's a set of pipes. And just so you know, that means, quick math, there's approximately 3,212 pipes in this organ. Now I say approximate because some ranks use multiple, or some stops use multiple ranks of pipes to make their sound, and don't always consistently use the same number throughout the register. So that's approximate, but it's a lot of pipes. This organ was built, it says the installation date right here on the organ console, was 1992. For those of you who've been at St. Mark's for a while, you may remember the sanctuary was actually redone in 1989. And so at that point, a new organ was put in. We used to have a Moeller organ here. That was a company that's now out of business, but based in Hagerstown, Maryland. When the church was redone, they put in a new organ. Wicks built it, and it takes a while to build. So the church was finished in '89. This was actually installed in '91. I think the dedication was 1992, so that's why the date is on there. But so it took a couple years after the church was redone to get this built and then installed. We have 3 manuals, so 3 keyboards that the organist can play on, as well as the 4th keyboard, which is the pedals. And that's about all I can think to say right now while I'm sitting here. I'm going to change around here, and I'm going to hold the camera and show you the console from the organist's point of view and point out a few things. So here we are at the organ console for a quick, more close-up tour. Obviously, in front of me are the 3 keyboards. Below that, the pedal board, which is basically a keyboard you play with your feet. The reason there are 3 keyboards, a lot of people don't realize, is they each can play a different set of stops. The stops are the knobs to the right and left of the organ that turn on or off different sounds. And it's valuable to have multiple keyboards because you can group those sounds and then have more flexibility in the way you arrange the pieces that you're playing. So this top keyboard here is called the Swell, and the stops that go on the Swell are over here labeled Swell. So all the knobs under that are stops that play on the Swell. So you'll see if I pull one and then play this keyboard, there they are. If I don't pull any stops, the keyboard makes no sound. So just a quick word about the stops. They all have names. The names, if you know what they mean, just tell you different things about the type of pipe, the kind of sound it will make, and the pitch it plays at. So for example, that is hautbois, which is French for oboe, or if you were in England, you might say hautboy. It just means oboe. Oboe is a reed stop, kind of like the actual oboe that it imitates. And it's in the family of stops called reed stops. Reed stops are a family of pipes that use an actual reed to make the sound, unlike a flue stop, which is more like a flute, the way it works. So if you think of like a flute in an orchestra and how the player will blow across a hole to make the sound, that's similar to how a rank of pipes in the flue or flute family would work. Reeds are different though. Like if you think of an oboe or a clarinet or a saxophone, there's actually a small reed that the air blows across that vibrates, and that's what produces the sound. So they have a different quality to the sound, and that's how organs work. So the family of pipes called reeds include things like oboes, and next to it a trumpet, which we think of as a brass instrument, but the way we get the trumpet sound in an organ is just like the oboe. It's a reed stop. And so these stops with these names kind of imitate the instruments or things that they're named after. So, for example, the oboe stop sounds a little bit like an oboe. The trumpet sounds a little bit like a trumpet. Those are reed stops. If you see there, we have a bassoon, that's a reed stop. Below that are the flues. Flues are just more your regular pipes that work more like a flute, and they're divided into three categories. Flutes, and if you look, for example, there's a block flute. That's a flute stop. Strings, oh sorry, let me show you. So a flute stop sounds more fluty. Strings, and you'll usually know strings because they're named after things that sound like violin or cello or something like that. So that's voile or viol or viol, depending on how you want to pronounce that. Has a more string-like sound. A lot of strings have a second stop you can pull on with them, called a celeste. So you pull on your voile and your voile celeste, and the celeste is basically a second rank of pipes that's out of tune. You wouldn't play it by itself because it's out of tune, but when you pull it on with the voile itself, the two in combination create a sort of undulating effect. Celeste means heavenly. And so it has a very vocal, heavenly, vibrato kind of quality, hence the name. So those are strings. And then the real meat of the organ, the basic stops, are called principals for that reason. And they're all different families and groupings. They all work basically the same though. And so they'll have names like principal or diapason or mantra. This is a principal, for example. If we switch over here to the great, we actually have some stops named principal. So there you have a principal. It's just your sort of your fundamental basic organ sound. Now the numbers have to do with the pitch that the pipes play at. So for example, right there you have roar flute 8. An 8-foot stop means, first of all, that the lowest note, that pipe, that's not the pipe, but just showing you an example, the lowest pipe, in other words, the biggest pipe, is actually 8 feet long. And it produces a tone that is basically written pitch. So if I played middle C on this 8-foot pipe, it would be the same middle C that a singer would sing or a piano would play or any other instrumentalist would play. It is the written pitch that you would see notated on a sheet of paper, on written music. Now, the way physics of sound and pipes works, the shorter the pipe, the higher the sound. The longer the pipe, the lower the sound. And it works mathematically. So if an 8-foot pipe is your fundamental written pitch, a 4-foot pipe, which is half the length, basically sounds an octave higher. and I'll demonstrate that for you. So here's the middle C on an 8-foot pipe, and now all I'm doing is switching to 4-foot. You hear that's twice as high, it's an octave high. I'm actually going to switch now to a 2-foot pipe, so we've halved the length again, so now we're 2 octaves up. If I pull all 3 of those together, you're hearing all those notes playing 3 octaves simultaneously. So again, here's 8-foot, 4-foot, 2-foot, and then all 3 together. That is basically how pipes work. You may see other numbers like 16, so that's twice as long, which means it's an octave below. There's 32. That means the fundamental pipe for that rank of pipes, the lowest note would be 32 feet long, so twice 16. So compared to an 8-foot pipe, it sounds 2 octaves below. Now in our organ, if you look at these pipes, these ones that are in the front of the case are quite large, but they're not 32 feet tall, for sure. I believe our largest pipes are actually 16 feet. The way they have ways of getting around that, so we have a 32-foot pipe here, but it's not actually 32 feet. It's 16 feet, but it has a cap in it, or other tricks that organ builders have to get the same sound. But if you basically take a pipe and put a cap in it, you've effectively doubled the length of the sounding column of air without actually changing the length of the pipe, because the air goes up, hits the cap, and then goes back down. So it travels twice the length of the pipe. Organ builders have all sorts of tricks like that because there's not always space to fit everything in. And so you might not have enough room for an actual 32-foot pipe. Although I have been in cathedrals in England for sure that have real 32-foot long pipes. Often they're up in the ceiling where you can't see them, or back in a cavity in the church that you couldn't even see, because they're very, very large. So back to our divisions. What got me onto this was just saying how these are the swell stops, and they play on the swell. So you see, if I pull a couple, they play on the swell. They don't play here on the great. They don't play here. Okay. However, if I go over here to the great, which is the middle keyboard, if I pull a couple things, they do play here. All right. So our organ, and they're all different. Our organ has 4 different divisions. There's the great, which is the middle keyboard, and is your main sort of loudest pipes. It's the kind of pipes I would use to like accompany a congregational hymn. The choir is the lowest keyboard down here, called so because it's so often used to accompany the choir, because it's the lowest and sort of closest to the player. It is under expression. And what that means is this pedal down here that moves these louvered or cantilevered doors that actually close the division off in a box. And so if I pull these stops out and close the box, so that's fully closed, it's soft. If I move these pedals and swing the boxes open, it gets louder. So closed, open. So it is just physically, mechanically changing the volume just by opening those doors wider or closing them shut. Our other divisions are the swell, which plays, as I already said, up on the upper keyboard. It also is shut behind a box, and so it can have its volume controlled. And then there's the pedal, and these, of course, don't play on a keyboard. They all play down on the pedal down below here, which I play with my feet, using my toes and some special organ shoes. My toes and heels, I should say, and I'll show you those shoes in a minute. The point of all this is you can group these. So I can pull some things on the grate, but let's say I want to add some oboe sound to that. So I can take the oboe from the choir. I can use these rocker tabs up here, called so because they rock back and forth, to put them together. So this says swell to great at 8-foot pitch, so fundamental pitch. So I can actually get that to play down here. So if I take that off, you hear the difference? And now if I couple it back on, I can group the sounds from the different divisions together. That, of course, then begs the question, well, why are they all on different keyboards? Why not just have them all on one? Well, that gives you the flexibility to have different sounds. So, for example, on the grade, I could set up something loud. On the choir, I could close the boxes and set up something soft. And that way I can play echoes. I could play something like this. All right, so contrasting sounds that you can echo with. You can also accompany yourself. So a way to do that would be to take contrasting families of pipes. So for example, I will play these string pipes, and again, there's the celeste, so kind of out of tune with itself, giving it this sort of faint vibrato-y sound. And I will play the oboe on the swell. And you can accompany yourself. So I will play the accompaniment notes on the soft stuff, and I'll solo a melody on the oboe. So I can play this. All right, so I got two contrasting sounds that I can play with my hands and feet, three if you had your feet, because they're grouped in different sections. So I can set up one section to be one sound, and then have like the melody or some other part of another part play on the other section and be contrasting in sound. So the organ has a lot of flexibility. Its nickname is the king of instruments for that reason. And you'll hear later when I record, it can be incredibly loud. In fact, we have a button for that called tutti. That means, that's Italian for all or everything. So if you pull out all the stops, it's incredibly loud. That probably fed back on the microphone. Whereas you can also play incredibly softly. So soft that it almost doesn't record on our microphones because it's so soft. It makes organs very difficult to record because they have such a wide dynamic range, but it also gives them a lot of flexibility and makes them able to interpret and perform a wide variety of music from different periods and styles. So it kind of has the nickname the king of instruments. Other things to show you down here are these little buttons you might sometimes see me press are called general pistons. What they do is you can set them to capture various setups of stops. So if you watch these stops as I push the buttons, you see them going in and out. Okay, I have saved those so that I can just press this one button and all the keyboards will play the things that I have preset, which saves a lot of time and hassle because you can play along and as you play grab stops, but that's really hard to do and keep playing and not miss all the notes. So at some point in fairly recent history of the organ, they came up with these wonderful devices called generals where you can be sort of playing along and you see how the buttons are right under the keys. You can sort of play along and get down here with your thumb or play along this way and get with your finger. And so you can sort of be playing along and hit one and change the stops as needed without having to actually reach over and grab the stops on the stop jam. So that's one thing. Down below we have similar, all these are called toe pistons or toe studs. They do the same thing, it's just they're bigger so you can hit them with your feet. As you're playing a pedal line, you could reach over and hit one with your foot. As I already said, these are these swell shades. They're called shoes. They move the swell and choir shades to change the volume. I already showed you that earlier. So you're literally just opening and closing a box and changing the volume. This one is a little different. It's called the Crescendo Pedal. Crescendo means to get louder, and it actually changes the volume by adding more stops. So if you listen, as I move it, it's actually subtracting and adding stops to change the volume. Last thing I want to say before I leave here and take you into the organ itself, a word about this tutti button. So you've heard the expression pulling out all the stops. Well, that comes from organ playing. As I already said before, these are called stops. And I remember when I first started playing organ, I thought it was strange that they're called stops and not goes, because when you pull one out, it makes the sound. So you would think you pull it out, you've made the sound turn on. Why don't they call them goes instead of stops? Well, the reason is because of the way organs are made, especially originally before they had electricity. Organs were mechanical. Everything you did on the organ had a physical mechanical connection. Like the keys, for example, when you hit a key, would actually push a wooden lever that would pull a metal wire and move a valve that opened up underneath a pipe to let the air in. So it wasn't electricity, it was just a physical connection. And the stops were the same. Underneath a rank of pipes would be a slider that had holes in it. And there'd be basically a different slider for each stop that would control that pipe, that set of pipes. And if you pulled out the stop, you basically were moving the slider into position so that the holes lined up underneath the pipes. So they were no longer stopped. They had holes so that when you opened up the valve, the air would go. If you engaged the stop, then the slider was actually in the way. And so when a key was pressed and the air came through, it wouldn't actually go into that pipe because the air was stopped. So that's how they got that name. The sliders actually stopped the air, and so they came to be known as stops. You would engage a stop, basically to stop the sound, or pull it out to make it go. And so that's why they're called stops. And that expression, pulling out all the stops, means you've taken your organ and you've pulled out every single sound, all of these knobs that you have available to you, you've pulled every one of them out so that you are playing the organ as loud and as full as it can possibly go. And that's where we get that expression. Pulling out all the stops means you've used everything in your bag of tricks. You've done everything you can. No holds barred. Because of electricity and modern programming, we now have this awesome button, Tutti, which pulls out all the stops without actually having to do anything. You just press that button, and the organ will play as loud as it can. These are my special organ shoes. They are basically like tap shoes. They're very thin leather that conform very closely to the foot. They have hard leather heels that are slick, and then soft leather toes that are more grippy. And they allow me to play the pedals more accurately. I can turn and pivot on the heel because it's hard, and I can grip the pedals a little better with the toe since they're soft. And that allows me to play faster. I can pivot between the small pedals more easily and more accurately. If I play in my regular shoes, which are much wider because they have a bigger, rubber sole, it's very easy to accidentally hit too many pedals at once because they're so tiny. But with these special shoes on, which most organists wear, it makes it a little better. Next, I'm going to show you something that very few people ever get to see. The organ, of course, runs on air, and it has a blower that pumps air to all the chambers to provide the wind pressure to the pipes. That is provided by a large blower that is in a basement underneath the organ. We call it the pit. So here we are down in the pit, kind of loud. You can hear the blower running. The stairs come down. What you see here is a large blower. A turbine that spins a fan that sends pressure through this pipe up into this reservoir, which the springs and the baffle on top help regulate the pressure. That then goes out this giant tube underneath the floor and up into the organ above. All right, so now for the next part of the tour, we are outside of the organ currently. If you remember the 3 keyboards and the pedal played 3 different groupings of pipes, those groupings are also grouped together in the organ itself. They each play from different areas of the organ. So this part right here that I'm facing now, everything behind these pipes is the swell playing from the top keyboard. And remember I said those are closed behind doors that you can move with pedals. If you look through these pipes, see that wood behind it, those are the doors. So they are currently closed. That's the swell. The other side basically cut the organ in half. The other lower side behind those pipes is the choir. Again, remember both those are under expression because of these doors. So I just opened the doors. Now look. With these doors open now, you can see through the pipes back to the pipes behind. And that's how that volume control works. You literally just open those doors and the sound comes out better through the gaps than it does when the doors are closed. So you have the swell is the left side, choir is the right side of the bottom of the organ. Then if you look up top, you see how those pipes, you can see through them. You can see the stained glass window. That's because unlike the swell and the choir, the grate and the pedal divisions aren't under expression. There are no doors to close them off. They are always out in the open, and they always play at the same volume. There's nothing you can do to change the volume of those. If you're using those kind of stops, the only way to change the volume is to add more or subtract from them so that you're playing fewer stops. But you can't actually change the volume of the pipe. And technically, you can't in the choir either. You just can open and shut the doors. But the actual volume of the pipe never changes. Now, basically, from about halfway up the organ up, it's completely open to the ceiling. And all those pipes are just basically out in the open on the floor. And I'll go up there in a minute and show you. But both the grate and the pedal divisions are up top there. For us here in church, that sometimes creates a problem because heat rises. And the heat and humidity greatly affects the tuning of the pipes. So on a hot summer day, if you first come in the church and the air conditioning's only been running for a few minutes, the bottom of the organ might be in a completely different tuning than the top because the top is still hot. So a lot of times we turn the air conditioning on well before a service starts, not just so that the room is comfortable when everyone arrives, but so that the organ will actually be in tune by the time the service starts. So now I'm going to take you inside the organ, and I've removed the side panel of the organ. This is how you get inside of it to tune. But just want to show you the mechanical things down here. You see all sorts of wind lines. Those PVC pipes are wind lines that connect. This is a secondary blower. I already showed you the main blower down below. But all these reservoirs, these boxes that you see in front of you, they're air reservoirs that hold air, and then the pipes connect them to the different parts of the organ. The air has to be held in reservoirs, and there's often baffles and other sorts of valves and things on them that regulate the pressure, because if your pressure wasn't regulated and it didn't stay a constant pressure, the organ would sound terrible. It would sound wavery. When the pressure went up, it would change the pitch of the pipe. When it went down, it would change the pitch of the pipe in the opposite direction. So your blower provides the air. That's one of them right there, kind of a turbine. But if the air wasn't regulated, the organ wouldn't sound as good. It would actually sound horrible. So if you look along the back wall, there's some stops there. They're all held in place with these boards with circles drilled in them. So each pipe comes down to a point called a toe, and it goes in a hole. But if that's all that held the weight of it, they would actually bend. Most of the pipes are made of not pure lead, but a mixture of lead and other things like tin or zinc. And so they're pretty flexible. And if they weren't properly supported, they would just bend. So you see down there against that back wall, there's a whole rank of pipes there. Down below here is mostly mechanical. We'll go up top in a minute and see more pipes. But do you see the bends in these pipes? It's almost like a complete curlicue. That's one of the ways organ tuners can make them longer without having to make them taller. The actual length of the pipe is longer because of the curlicue in it, but it's not as tall, so it can fit in a smaller space. That's one of their many tricks. Now these are reed stops. And this is called the tuning wire. Pulling that up or down will change the tuning of the pipe. All right, so this is the main part of the swell chamber. Look at all those pipes. So each row is a set of pipes. You see them, so one back there, then another row, and so on. Each of those is a rank of pipes. So one of those could be the oboe, one could be the flute, one could be the trumpet. They're in rows, in note order, so that the organist can tune them, or sorry, the organ builder can tune them. So let me zoom in here on some of these pipes just to show you. Here's some metal pipes like I was talking about before that are flared. Some of them have little caps on them. Some of them you can change the voicing. See that little, almost looks like the curl of an old like cat food can or an old thing of anchovies. The metal just peels down basically. You can turn it and that affects the quality of the sound. But look at these pipes. So just to give you an idea, that's my hand. So that pipe is 3.5 inches. It's actually a little longer if you look down below, but the point is, some of these pipes, look at that one, tiny. So they can be as big as 32, or in some cases in cathedrals, 64 feet tall, down to the size of smaller than a ballpoint pen. There's some very, very tiny pipes in here. So it's just neat to see the different sizes. So we're starting here tiny, working our way up, remembering that as they get bigger, they get lower in pitch, not higher. Here we have our swell shades, the little panels that open and close, and sure enough, if I get the camera just right, you can see through them out into the congregation. So they're currently open to maximum volume right now, and if they were closed, it would be very loud in the chamber here if you were in it while someone was playing, but out in the congregation you would not hear as much. And here's some of the taller pipes. They go through, so I'm about 6 or 8 feet off the ground right now. They go through down to the floor. These are too tall to fit in the main part of the chamber, so they actually start down below and come up through the floor. So this is the swell chamber. Now we're going to go through another door to the basically third story of the organ. All right, I am now up on the third story basically of the organ. I just came through this hole. You can see down below the swell chamber with all of its pipes. There's not a hole down to it, but on this side down below would be the choir chamber, and I am now up above. You see how high I am up in the church. There's the back window. This is the grate and pedal, and like I said, these are just open. They're not in a chamber. There's none of those cantilevered doors in front of them to affect the volume. So you can just look straight through these pipes and see out into the church. So they play at the same volume all the time. And just like down below, they're arranged in rows. Each rank has its own row, and they're in note order so that the organ tuner can tune them. There's another row there. These are called walk boards in between, kind of like catwalks in a theater. If they didn't put these walk boards in, there'd be no way you could get back to reach the other parts of the organ. And then down below, these are some of the biggest pedal stops. Some of the 16-foot pipes that are really, really big. And see right there, there's a ladder to get out of that hole and also to reach up to parts of them to tune them. It's quite tricky. So that is quite a good ways down to the floor. This thing you see here is basically a tubular bell. The organ has a chime that it can play. This is different from the outside bell that we ring during the Eucharist out in the Memorial Garden. This is an actual chime that you can play like a scale on. That's the only thing in here that's not pipes. I mean, they are pipes, but they're not wind pipes. The rest of these are all wind pipes. And as I said before, they're made of lots of different things. The metal ones are lead mixed sometimes with zinc or other metals. And if we go down here, you'll see here's some wooden ones. A lot of pipes are just made of wood. They're square pieces of wood, and these ones are actually capped. I was saying that before. If you put a cap in it, it effectively doubles the length of the pipe because the air goes up, the length of the pipe hits the cap, and then the air goes back down before it comes out. So you've effectively doubled the length of the pipe. And you see a lot of them are all different shapes. Some of these reed stops have sort of flared ends. that give them a different quality to their sound. Right now I'm at the front of the organ. So here we are out above the church. Kind of an interesting view of things. These are some of the front pipes that you see when you're sitting in the pews, but you can look through them out into the church, and they're quite tall. They go all the way down to the floor. And here is, coming up to this chamber, gives you one of the best views of the front rose window that you're ever going to get. So here we are walking back. Here's one of those reed stops that has a curly cue in it I was talking about before that makes it longer without actually making it taller. And then across the hatch, there's some more of the largest pipes that go all the way down to the ground below. Here are other ranks of pipes in order. Not fall in this hole. And then here's a great view out to the front of the church. Kind of a unique place to be. Here's our beautiful rose window. I hope you've enjoyed this tour, and I look forward to playing the Mendelsohn Sonata for you now. So finally now, I'm going to play Mendelssohn's Second Organ Sonata for you. It's a sonata in C minor. The first movement is rather short, and it's a grave, or grave, meaning slow and serious. It's quite loud, and it flows continuously with no stopping into the second movement, which is an adagio. I will film those two movements together with the camera concentrated on my hands, because it's one of those where it kind of highlights the different divisions of the organ and how they work together. So some of the louder parts I'll play here, you'll see in the grave, and then I switch between to make louder and softer sounds and then come back to the loud part again. And then in the adagio, it's one of those where you can kind of accompany yourself. So I will be playing the accompaniment on this soft part of the choir, and the melody will actually be played on the oboe. All right, so again, I'll be filming close to my hands so you can see the interplay of how that works. And the hands, it's really cool, switches between the oboe playing high and then sometimes the oboe plays low, and you'll see my hands switch back and forth for that. The next part, I'll change the camera angle to focus on my feet. The third movement is an Allegro maestoso vivace, which is a fast but stately piece, almost like a wedding march. And I'm focusing on my feet in this case because there's a lot of pedal scales in it, so you can see sort of the fancy footwork and how it works to have the special shoes on, and how my heels and toes sort of pivot all around the keys on the keyboard, the pedal board. And then finally, I'll do a more regular camera angle for the closing fugue. The fourth movement is a fugue with a very grand ending to it, kind of like a postlude I would play in church. So hope you enjoy Mendelssohn's Second Organ Sonata in C minor.